What's up everybody, Brad here. In this third installment of my miniDSP video series, we'll go over EQing your subwoofer within REW and applying that to the miniDSP, easily tweaking the EQ to fix small problem areas and some things you may want to consider when using room correction like Audyssey. Sound good? Then let's go. So obviously this is the third video of my miniDSP tutorial series, which I did mention in the intro. Now if you haven't seen the first and second video, I'd highly suggest that you watch those first just to make following this video much easier. Plus, I don't recommend skipping steps covered in previous videos unless you want your subwoofers to possibly sound worse. You can check them out through the card above, but I'll also put a link in the description as well as in a pinned comment for easy access. Also, I do recommend watching this whole video or at least checking out the room correction chapter later in the video before you start with EQ. There is some information that could be useful to you if you plan to run Audyssey or other room correction software, and it may prevent you from having to redo your EQ after the fact. Chapter markers will be placed within the video, so you should be able to easily find it. And finally, before we dive in, if you're new to the channel, I post new home theater and gaming related content every single week, so please consider subscribing if you haven't already. If you'd like to show your support for the channel, please consider using my Amazon affiliate links, which you'll find in the description. And I do want to give a shout out and a thanks to SVS for lending me the second PB2000 Pro subwoofer to help make these videos a bit easier and more in-depth than they would be without it. Check out some of their products linked in the description. Now, let's go ahead and dive in and get started. So now that we've time aligned all of our subwoofers together, it's now time to apply the EQ, and luckily for us, REW makes it really easy, especially if you have the miniDSP 2x4 HD. So to do that, you'll notice I've labeled this one time aligned for EQ. This is just so that I know that this is the one that I'm going to use for EQ. So I'm going to click on the EQ button in the upper pane here of REW, and I'll go ahead and maximize this, and we'll select the miniDSP 2x4 HD. That's the one that I have. All right, so for the target settings, the target type, we're doing a subwoofer. Base management, we don't want anything here, so just set this to a really high number. We don't want it doing anything at all because we're going to be using the receiver to do that. So I just set mine to 850. The low frequency cutoff, I just set this to 0 because we don't want it to do anything. And then this will probably be unticked by default. We're going to tick this because I'm going to add a room curve, or AKA house curve. I got these settings from the Home Theater Gurus video and I really like how it sounds. So we're going to take the LFE rise start and set that to 100. And then the LFE rise end, we'll set it to 30. And then we'll leave these other settings at default for right now. But if we take a look at this, you'll see it's not really a straight line, which is fine. But basically, we want this top part to be around 85 decibels. And then we want this house curve to slope it down around 75 at the crossover point, which is around 80 to, let's say, 100. So what we can do there is start to adjust this rise slope upwards, and you'll see that'll raise that overall, and we can bring this down. You'll see in a moment what might happen, but normally I'd try to bring this up to around 85, and we want a 10 decibel difference between this really low stuff here and then this kind of high stuff up here. So we want this, if this is around, let's just say 75 right here, and then this needs to be around 85 here, so we can probably boost it up just a little bit more, and then that's about right. Yep. There we go. So you can leave this at 75 for now, and then twirl this little box here and click on match response to target. So what I didn't mention while recording are the settings I like to use for my filter task settings. The settings here are not the default settings in REW, so you'll have to adjust them to match the ones you see here. These settings also came from one of Home Theater Guru's miniDSP videos. I've had really good results using these settings, but if your subs can play into the lower octaves like 10 Hz for example, then you'd probably want to change the lower match range setting from 18 to 10, which will allow REW to work its EQ magic down to those areas as well. For my setup in subwoofers, which go down to around 17 Hz give or take, going from 18 to 17 didn't change anything, so I decided to leave it as it is. And since the target EQ line is well below that of the total output, we will be cutting a lot more than we're boosting, as you'll see in a moment, so I wouldn't worry too much if you're concerned about the individual max boost and overall max boost settings. Now you might get something that pops up here, just click OK, and you'll see it it starts to do some things here to make it try to match this line. And you notice it didn't match it perfectly. And so what we can do is we can come here and adjust the target level. You know, I'll go 74 and see if it's a little better, if we can get rid of these squiggly lines. Click OK. And it kind of, you know, made it a little better. Let's try 73. And again, you could just play with this a little bit until you get it to kind of where you want it to be. This one's just not really changing much, and what we might want to do is we might want to tweak this a little bit afterwards, so that's fine. So okay, I've settled on 73 dB. Now again, this is a kind of wishful thinking best case scenario here. It doesn't mean that we're going to get exactly this response when we go to do our measurement, and that's why we can come back and tweak this a little bit after we get done. And also, if you want to do one at 72, one at 73, one at 74, save those out separately and then try those, you can do that too. But for now, I'm just going to stick with this one here, which is 73. So I've already clicked match response to target. Now I just want to click on save filter coefficients to file, put this in our config folder, and just 73 dB house curve. So we've saved that, and now if we come over to the miniDSP, we'll minimize this. Don't close this in case you want to come back to it. Go over to the miniDSP. We're going to click on PEQ, and we want to make sure we're on the Advanced tab. If you're on the Basic tab, this won't work. So click on Advanced and click Import. Now find that file that you just saved, which for me is on the desktop, and we'll click Open. And you'll see it's added this to this speaker, to the parametric EQ, which is exactly what we want. But we need to apply this EQ to every single sub. So just like before, if you followed my first video, we can link two of these together. So this is the sub front left. I can select sub right, click on link. It'll ask me to say yes. So now you'll notice when I go over to this sub, it's now linked with that one. And we can do the same with 3 and 4. So parametric EQ, click on advanced, click on import, and select the one that we wanted. And we can select, this is if you have 4 subwoofers, I only have 3, but I'm doing this just to show you. Click on link, click on yes, and there you go. Now that is linked with this one. So perfect. So now let's go ahead and do a measurement and see what we get. Let's say EQ 73 dB. And look at that. That's very, very similar to the actual EQ readout. So if we look at that, so it is very, very close. You know, I'm just gonna keep this because it looks pretty good, but this will lead me on to what I want to talk about next, and that is kind of making some minor adjustments, not to the overall EQ, but just say we want to try to fix this little null in here, and we maybe want to put a, you know, crossover down here at like, you know, 13 to 15 hertz. We'll go ahead and jump into that and try that out. All right, so let's try tweaking this EQ a little bit here to get a slightly better response. So first we want to pinpoint exactly where we want to apply this EQ. And you know, this actually looks pretty good for the most part. This kind of has a little peak here, so we'll start here. We're looking at 78 dB and 64 hertz. And we need to come down to about right here. So at 64 hertz, so we're at 78 dB, but let's try cutting it too. So what we can do is go over to the miniDSP, and we want to go to the inputs and outputs routing. We don't want to use the other ones because remember, all of our EQs are on here and we can't really adjust this after the fact. But what we can do is come over to inputs and routing, hit parametric EQ, and add some few minor adjustments here. So we wanted to do 64, not 54, 64 hertz. And I said, let's do -2. And then the Q is technically called the Q factor. And basically a higher value here will make it more narrow. So it won't affect as much around it. As you can see here, as I bring it up, if I put in, let's say 12, you notice it's a pretty narrow area that it's affecting. So let's go ahead and give this a shot at Q of 12 and -2 and see what happens. So we're going to click on measure and we'll just say 64 -2. Okay, check that out. It corrected that little area there and got rid of that big bump. Now you could go in there and tweak it, and honestly, you probably really wouldn't notice much of a difference between the two. So this is kind of a negligible thing. It's just if you have OCD and are perfectionists like me, you can go in here and tweak to your heart's content until, you literally can't speak anymore and your eyes are all blurry and stuff. So what we can do next is go over to this 80 Hertz dip here and try to boost that up a little bit. I try to avoid boosting any more than 3 dB. So what I want to do is we're at 80 Hertz here and we need to go up to around here, which is a difference of, it's about 4. So let's try boosting it 2 and see what happens. So again, we'll go over to the miniDSP, already in here. Do another one. We don't want to change this one because we already got that put in. We'll hit EQ2. We'll put in our frequency that we need. I wanted to boost it 2. And let's try that same Q factor of 12 that we did earlier. That way it's not really affecting much of anything else. So I'm going to click measure. I'll label this 80 plus 2. Always want to keep track of what you're doing. Okay, so as you can see here, we kind of got rid of that bump by boosting it a couple decibels. We could probably try to go one more. What I'm not liking is it's boosting it a little too much around that area. So what I could do is I could go back to the miniDSP and adjust that Q factor. Let's go up to 15 and see what happens there. Click measure and we'll add just 15 to the end so that way we know it's different. Okay, and not much has changed. So this is kind of a thing where you got to go, okay, I'm happy with this and I'm not going to adjust it anymore. I'm actually probably just going to bring it back to 12, which is what it was before, since it was really no change, really no reason to change it. So we'll just leave that there. Again, it's not perfect, but it's way better than it was. And then now this is kind of our final output here, but I want to add a crossover. That way the subs are not trying to reproduce things really below the tuning point. So I know that the tuning point on all of these subwoofers is around 16 or 17. And what I'll typically do is add a crossover that's a little bit lower than that, because it's not like a brick wall where at 15 Hertz things are just gonna go whoop, like straight down and not play anything. There's gonna be kind of a gradual roll off. So you can kind of take some liberties and set it a little lower. So in order to do that, we want to click on the X over button. Remember the one that we set up earlier in the first video. And then instead of bypass, we'll turn on the high pass filter setting. And you'll see this is way up here and we don't want that. What we want is something around, I'm just going to put in 13 Hertz because I know that that is where I have it set on mine. And you'll see it's a gradual slope. Now I think by default, this is set to something like 12 or 24. That's not what we want. We want kind of a steeper roll off. So 48 is pretty much what you want, and just leave that there. And since these are linked, so this one is also adjusting this one, as you can see. We'll also need to go in here and do the same thing to the third one. So apply 13, and then now this one, again, if you have 4 subs, this is useful. I only have 3. And now we can do another measurement, and we'll just say 13 Hertz X over. All right, and as you can see, nothing else really changed. We got a little bit of change there, but it starts, tapering off here, and this is perfectly fine. I'm gonna keep it just like this. So this is a great house curve we got set up. Now you'll also notice that, we're a little bit off here. So we want this to be around 85 decibels, and then we want this to be around 75. So we're about a decibel off. So what we can do is go back to the miniDSP, into the inputs and outputs, or inputs and routing, sorry. And we'll add a decibel here, do a measurement. And this is just so we can get closer to that house curve that we initially set up. Now that we've added that +1 there, we have the around 85 decibels here and then around 75 here, which is exactly what we wanted out of our house curve. We didn't really have to boost anything too crazily. We added a decibel, which honestly really isn't gonna do anything for your headroom. It's not gonna make it bad or anything like that, so no worries there. And we have some squiggles down here and some things that are a little higher than others, but we are gonna be crossing these over anyway around this area, so I'm not really worried about that. Now you can go in here and tweak this if you want to, but I honestly would probably just leave it, because at some point you get into the law of diminishing returns where you're just going to be trying to do something that really isn't going to be noticeable at all. Now something I do want to add real quick is after we're done setting everything up, level matching, time aligning, and then doing the EQ, and you've got it all tweaked and exactly where you want it, you're going to want to rerun room correction if you use it. So you're gonna want to rerun Audyssey or YPAO or Dirac Live or whatever you have. But there's a note in there that I definitely want to address, and that is most of these room EQ things, I keep wanting to say room EQ wizard, that's the program I'm using. Most of these room correction software things will EQ that house curve out that you spent so much time tweaking and getting exactly where you want it. And if you don't want that, there's a couple of options. I know that certain versions of Dirac Live allow you to disable subwoofer correction. I believe YPAO might do that too. Again, I'm not 100% sure. If any of you guys use that stuff, leave a comment down below and let me know, and I'll try to pin it that way, or put it in a comment and pin it up top so people know that, hey, you can disable the sub correction on those room correction softwares. Now for Audyssey, there is a way to do that and disable the room correction, but you need two things. One, you need a receiver that is compatible with the Audyssey MultiEQ Editor app that you can buy on the App Store or through like Google Play or something, and I believe that's $20. Okay, hold up a second, Brad. There actually is another way to retain your house curve while using room correction and not spending money on an app, but it's not ideal for a couple reasons, which I'll touch on in a second. Basically, you want to run Audyssey after time aligning your subwoofers, but before you apply any EQ using the miniDSP. Then set your subwoofer's trim level in the receiver to 0 dB because Audyssey is probably going to lower it quite a bit. Then go through the EQ process from earlier in this video. Now, it's not ideal because Audyssey may have EQ'd the overall response of your subs quite a bit, which means you'll have less to work with when trying to apply your house curve. This means you may have to boost your overall output in the miniDSP more after EQ, which will bring your headroom down and possibly cause distortion. Plus, you'll also be applying the miniDSP EQ on top of the room correction EQ, which can introduce other issues and also affect phase. It's best avoided if at all possible, but it is an option that you can try for free if you want. Again, you'll make sure that your receiver supports or is supported through that app. Otherwise, you're going to spend 20 bucks and basically throw it out the window because you won't be able to do anything. But basically, that allows you to disable room correction on the subwoofer after the fact, so you can retain that house curve. And I'll include a little clip of me doing that on the iPad right now, just so you see what it looks like. So we're here in the Audyssey MultiEQ Editor app, and I'm just gonna run through real quick what I do to disable room correction on the subwoofer only. It's actually pretty simple. So initially, Audyssey is gonna create a default measurement room correction file. I typically label that Audyssey default do not edit. That way I can make a copy of that and do whatever adjustments I need to. So to do that, I'll just hit edit and then select the one I want to copy and then hit plus and it'll make a copy. And then I can go in and edit this file here and we'll label it subwoofer room correction RC disable. Okay, we'll hit done and we'll go in and edit it. I'm gonna go into multi-EQ filter frequency range, and up here you'll see fronts, center, all that stuff. We wanna select the subwoofer, and then we just wanna take this line here and drag it all the way over. We'll hit done. You've now disabled the room correction on the subwoofer, but we're not quite done yet. We need to upload that to the receiver. So you're gonna select the little upload icon in the upper left, send to AV receiver, and then once your receiver is found, you'll go ahead and select it there, and then it's going to ask you if you wanna send it to your receiver. Hit send, it'll do its thing, and then you're good to go. I'm not gonna send it now because I've already done it, but that's basically an easy way to disable room correction on the subwoofer. Now, one thing I do wanna mention is that if you plan on using something like Audyssey's DynamicEQ, then you'll want to either let Audyssey flatten out that house curve because it's going to boost it up anyway with DynamicEQ. You can try disabling room correction for the subwoofer in the app like I just showed you, but I'm not sure how well that would work as I haven't tried it. Now I'm currently in the process of recording and editing the fourth and final video, which will cover time aligning your EQ'd subwoofers to your main speakers to figure out the best crossover for your speakers and your room. I'll also walk you through how to determine the best crossover setting for your center and surround speakers as well. Look for that video next week. Now, if you enjoyed this video at all and found it helpful, please give it a thumbs up as it helps this video reach more people. If you have any questions about the stuff covered in this video, leave a comment down below and let me know. I'll try to get to it if I can. Thank you for watching, everyone, and I'll catch you in the next one.